Mark sat in his favorite armchair, the dark leather creaking slightly under his weight, his fingers tracing the rim of a whiskey glass as he stared out the window. The city skyline stretched before him, illuminated by the faint glow of streetlights. From this vantage point he could see everything. It was one of the perks of living in this luxury apartment. A perfect view. He could watch his world unfold from here. His wife, Rachel, unaware that he was watching her every move. The silence in the room was comforting, the steady ticking of the clock on the wall marking time in a way that seemed almost deliberate. He didn't mind the silence. In fact, he craved it. The noise of the world outside, the hustle and bustle of the city below, often felt distant, irrelevant to him. He didn't need the chaos. He had everything he needed right here in his control. Rachel had always been unpredictable, her moods shifting like the weather. Some days she was the woman he married, thoughtful, affectionate, with that glint of excitement in her eyes. But those days had become fewer and farther between. Now she seemed more like a ghost drifting through their house, a shell of the person he once knew. Her eyes, once bright with curiosity and passion, now seemed vacant, distant. The passion they had shared in their early years of marriage had faded into the background, like an old photo forgotten in a drawer. Rachel had become something else, something unrecognizable. But it was fine, he had learned to live with it. He had learned to watch, to observe. He could control this. The phone on the coffee table buzzed and Mark's eyes snapped to it. Rachel's name flashed across the screen. He had been expecting this. It was always like this. She would be out with friends, pretending to be happy, only to retreat back into herself when she came home. It was a cycle he knew all too well. Mark picked up the phone, glancing at the text that had appeared. Erica canceled again. I'll be home late. It didn't surprise him. Rachel's plans always fell through. She was unreliable just like everyone else in her life. But he didn't mind. It meant more time to work, more time to observe her without interference. Rachel would come home, find him in his chair, and they would go through the motions. She might try to talk or she might retreat to her study. Either way, it was predictable. It was easy. As Rachel entered the apartment later that evening, Mark barely acknowledged her presence. He knew what was coming, her quiet apology, her attempt to explain her day, her distant eyes filled with longing for something she couldn't name. Mark had learned long ago that it was better to say nothing, to let her stew in her own dissatisfaction. He had no interest in engaging in the games she played with herself. He had bigger things in mind. The thought crossed his mind again as it often did these days. His plans. His strategy. He had been waiting for this moment, this culmination of the slow, steady unraveling of Rachel's life. It had been a long time coming. Years of observing, of waiting for her to show cracks, to slip up. She had made it so easy. Her desire for freedom, her desire for something more than what she had led her to this point. And now the game was almost over. Mark's fingers tightened around the whiskey glass as he took a sip. The taste was sharp, familiar, grounding him. He glanced at Rachel, who was now sitting on the couch, her eyes lost in thought. She was waiting for him to say something, to initiate the evening's charade. But he wasn't ready. Not yet. Not until everything was in place. Rachel stood up and walked toward the kitchen, her footsteps soft on the hardwood floor. She moved with a quiet grace, but Mark knew better than to be fooled by her exterior. Underneath it all, there was a simmering frustration, a desire for something more. Something that, in her eyes, he couldn't provide. But that wasn't the real problem. No, the problem was her willingness to seek it elsewhere. Mark had spent years building the perfect life, a life that allowed him to maintain control. He had crafted a world where Rachel was the perfect wife, the perfect image of happiness. But all of that had come undone. Slowly, over time, she had let her walls slip, and now she was vulnerable. And vulnerable people made mistakes. As Rachel prepared her dinner, Mark couldn't help but think about the game he was playing. It wasn't just about punishment. It wasn't just about getting back at her for her infidelities. No, it was about something deeper. It was about power, control, and the satisfaction of knowing that he held the cards. He had watched her for so long and now he was about to pull the strings. He finished his whiskey and set the glass down with a soft clink. His eyes locked onto Rachel, who was lost in her thoughts, and for a moment, a flicker of something dark passed through his mind. He wasn't sure what it was, anger, resentment, or maybe something more insidious. But it didn't matter. Everything was falling into place. The pieces were moving exactly as he had planned. As Rachel sat down to eat her dinner, Mark stood, the weight of the evening ahead of him settling into his bones. He had the perfect setup. Rachel would continue to falter, to spiral, until she was nothing but a shadow of herself. And when she was completely broken, when she had nothing left, that's when the real game would begin. Mark smiled to himself. He was in control. Always had been. Always would be. Rachel had always been the type to hide her frustrations behind a carefully curated smile. Tonight was no different. She sat at the kitchen table, quietly eating her dinner, while Mark remained in the living room, barely acknowledging her presence. The silence between them was thick, almost suffocating. It had been like this for weeks, the comfortable distance between them growing into a vast, unspoken gap. As Rachel finished her meal, her mind wandered to the events of the day, the cancelled plans with Erica, the endless hours at work, and the gnawing emptiness that seemed to follow her everywhere. The moments she once enjoyed, like chatting with friends or spending time with Mark, felt like distant memories. Now her life seemed like a series of disjointed events, with no real connection or purpose. She glanced over at Mark, who was still sitting in his chair, his gaze fixed on the darkened city below. He looked so composed, so in control, but Rachel couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. She hadn't told him about the night with Jack. It wasn't that she felt guilty, she didn't. It was more the idea that if she told him, it would shatter the fragile veneer of their marriage. The reality of their situation was already too much to bear. Rachel had once believed that Mark was the man who would be there for her, the one who would catch her when she fell. But somewhere along the way their connection had withered, and she found herself looking elsewhere for validation. She had become someone she didn't recognize, someone who sought escape in the arms of a stranger. But even as she thought about Jack, a wave of regret washed over her. The passionate escape, the fleeting freedom, it had all been so temporary. She had woken up alone, with nothing but the weight of her choices to carry. It was a stark contrast to the life she had once envisioned for herself. Rachel pushed the empty plate aside and stood up, walking slowly toward the living room. Mark didn't seem to notice her approach until she was standing in front of him, her eyes searching his face for any sign of emotion. "Mark," she said softly, her voice a mix of hesitation and longing. "Are you okay?" Mark's gaze never wavered from the window, but she saw the slight shift in his posture. He wasn't really listening. He rarely did anymore. Instead, he took a long, deliberate sip of his whiskey, the sound of the glass meeting his lips breaking the silence. "I'm fine," he said, his tone flat. It was the same response he had given her for the past several months, distant, detached, and cold. Rachel could feel the walls closing in, the realization settling in that their marriage was nothing but a facade. They were two strangers living in the same house, their once shared dreams long gone. Rachel began, but her voice faltered. She didn't know what to say. How could she explain the emptiness she felt inside, the desire for something more? How could she tell him that she was tired of pretending? Mark's eyes flicked to hers for a brief moment before he spoke again, his voice low, almost calculating. "I'm sure you're tired of pretending too," he said, his words laced with an undercurrent of something darker. "But we both know it's easier to stay in the game than to admit we've already lost." Rachel froze. His words hit her like a punch to the gut. She had never expected him to say anything like that, to be so blunt, so cold. The weight of his statement lingered in the air between them, and for a moment she wondered if he knew. "Lost?" she echoed, her heart pounding in her chest. "What are you talking about?" Mark finally looked at her, his expression unreadable. "You think I haven't been watching? You think I haven't seen how you've been slipping away? I've been waiting for this, Rachel. Waiting. All this time, and I've finally got what I need." Rachel's breath caught in her throat as the implications of his words settled in. He knew. He knew about the night with Jack. He knew everything. Mark leaned back in his chair, his lips curling into a faint smile. "I've been preparing for this moment. You've made it so easy. All I had to do was wait for you to make your move." Rachel's mind raced as the pieces fell into place. The emptiness, the coldness, the distance, it had all been part of his plan. He had been waiting for her to falter, to make a mistake so he could use it against her. For the first time in years, Rachel felt a flicker of fear. The man she had once loved, the man she had built a life with, was not who he seemed. He was a predator, playing a game she hadn't even known she was part of. And now she was trapped. "Mark," she whispered, her voice shaking. "What are you going to do?" Mark's eyes gleamed with a cold intensity. "What do you think I'm going to do? I'm going to let you fall, Rachel. Let you see what it feels like to lose everything. Because you've already lost me." The words stung, but they were nothing compared to the dread that settled in her chest. Rachel had no idea what Mark's next move would be, but she knew one thing for sure. Her life was about to change, and there was no escaping the consequences of her actions. Mark stood up from his chair, his gaze never leaving her. Don't worry, Rachel. You'll have plenty of time to reflect on your choices. I'll make sure of it. As he walked past her, heading for the door, Rachel stood frozen in place. Her heart pounded in her chest, and she suddenly realized the depth of her own despair. She had been living in a prison of her own making, but now it was no longer just a metaphor. It was real. And she was trapped, with nowhere to run. Mark opened the door and paused, casting one final glance over his shoulder. Don't worry, darling. This is just the beginning. And with that he was gone. Rachel stood alone in the silence, the weight of his words pressing down on her like a 1,000-pound burden. She could feel her life unraveling, and there was nothing she could do to stop it. The hours that followed Mark's departure felt like days. Rachel stood in the middle of the living room, her heart racing, the silence around her deafening. His words kept repeating in her mind, echoing like a constant reminder of her unraveling life. This is just the beginning. The phrase played over and over, until it felt like the only truth left in the world. Her mind raced with thoughts of how this had all started. The emptiness she'd felt for so long, the brief escape with Jack, the quiet decay of her marriage, everything had led her here. But never had she imagined Mark's reaction would be so cold, so methodical. She had never realized just how much he had been watching, how much he had planned. She paced back and forth trying to breathe through the panic, but it was no use. She felt trapped, cornered, with no way out. She couldn't even pick up the pieces of her shattered life. Not yet. Not while Mark was so firmly in control. Her phone buzzed on the coffee table, snapping her out of her thoughts. She rushed over, hoping for something, anything, that could help her make sense of this. It was a text from Erica. Asterisk, I'm so sorry, Ratch. I had no idea. Mark showed me everything. I don't know what to say. I thought I was helping, but I see now that I was just a pawn. Please, let's talk. Asterisk. Rachel stared at the message, her breath catching in her throat. She had always considered Erica a friend, someone she could count on. But now she realized just how deeply Mark's web of manipulation had spread. Erica, too, had been part of his plan. A pawn in the game Mark had been playing for years. Tears stung Rachel's eyes, but she wiped them away quickly. She couldn't afford to be weak, not now. Not when everything was falling apart. She quickly typed a response, her hands shaking. Asterisk, I don't know what to do anymore. I feel so lost. What does he want from me, Erica? Asterisk. She hit send, but before Erica could respond, Rachel's gaze fell to the envelope on the coffee table. The one Mark had left earlier. It was the same one that had shattered her world, the one with evidence of her infidelities, evidence that would be enough to ruin everything. She had been foolish, reckless. She hadn't thought about the consequences, hadn't realized that her desire for freedom would lead to her undoing. Rachel picked up the envelope and stared at it for a long moment, feeling its weight in her hands. She had never wanted to hurt anyone, least of all Mark. But somehow, her actions had betrayed the very life they had built together. And now she was paying the price. Her fingers trembled as she opened the envelope, pulling out the documents inside. Photos. Text messages. Details of every wrong move she'd made. Each page felt like a dagger, each word a reminder of her mistakes. She couldn't look away. She couldn't stop reading, as if the truth of her own destruction was the only thing that could fill the void inside her. As she finished reading, her hands fell to her lap, the weight of it all sinking in. Mark had everything. He knew everything. And he wasn't going to stop until he had taken everything from her. The sound of a door slamming in the distance startled her, and she jumped. Her thoughts spiraled out of control. Was it Mark coming back? Was he going to confront her again? The fear settled deep in her stomach, and she felt the walls closing in. She needed to do something. Anything. But what? How could she fight back when she had nothing left? Rachel stood up, pacing again, her mind in turmoil. She had to regain control. She couldn't let Mark win. She had to find a way out. She grabbed her phone, dialing Erica's number, hoping for some semblance of clarity, some shred of comfort. It rang 3 times before Erica picked up. Rachel? Erica's voice was shaky, full of guilt and confusion. I don't know what to do, Erica, Rachel interrupted, her voice raw. He's got everything. The photos, the messages, all of it. He's planning something. He's not just going to forgive me. I can't let him destroy everything. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Then Erica's voice broke through the silence, soft and filled with regret. I never thought it would go this far, Ratch. I'm so sorry. I had no idea what Mark was doing. He made me think I was helping. I've been part of it all along. Rachel's heart twisted in her chest. She could hear the pain in Erica's voice, but it didn't change the reality of the situation. Mark had orchestrated everything, every lie, every betrayal. And now she was paying the price. She was left with nothing but the wreckage of her own decisions. "I can't keep living like this," Rachel whispered, the tears finally falling freely. "I don't know who I am anymore, Erica. I'm lost." Erica's voice softened, almost a whisper. "I know. I can't fix this, but I'm here for you, Rach. You're not alone. We'll figure something out." Rachel didn't know if she could believe that. But for the first time in what felt like ages, there was a tiny glimmer of hope, a sliver of something that wasn't darkness. She sat down on the couch again, the phone still pressed to her ear, staring at the envelope on the coffee table. She couldn't undo what had been done. The damage was done, and Mark's control over her life was absolute. But somehow she knew that this wasn't the end. It couldn't be. She still had some fight left in her. And she would fight, somehow, someway. "Thanks, Erica," she whispered. "I'll talk to you soon." With a shaky breath, Rachel ended the call and stared out the window. The city below was alive, moving, breathing, and for the first time in a long while, she felt the weight of possibility on her shoulders. The game had just begun. The days that followed were a blur of anxiety and dread. Rachel could hardly focus on anything. Her mind was consumed by thoughts of Mark's cold, calculated moves. The images of the photos, the texts, and the overwhelming weight of everything he had uncovered haunted her every moment. But there was one thing Rachel couldn't shake, the feeling that Mark wasn't finished. It was as though he was waiting for her to make a move, to reveal more of herself than she ever intended. Rachel tried to keep things normal, to keep up appearances at work and with the few people left in her life. She put on a mask, smiling and acting as if everything was fine, even though inside she was crumbling. Each time she walked into the office, her stomach twisted in knots, the weight of her secrets threatening to explode. She had never felt more exposed, more vulnerable. But the most unsettling thing was the silence. Mark hadn't reached out in days. He had left her alone, which was worse than anything. It felt like he was waiting, watching, expecting her to make a mistake. She hadn't heard a word from him since their conversation, and she couldn't help but wonder what he was planning. What would he do next? One afternoon, as Rachel sat in her office, her phone buzzed with an incoming email notification. She glanced at the screen, half-heartedly expecting a work-related issue, but the subject line caught her eye. "Final notice, immediate action required." She clicked on the email, her fingers trembling as she read the words on the screen. "Dear Miss Fisher. We regret to inform you that your current situation regarding your work performance and personal conduct has been reviewed thoroughly. Due to recent personal matters becoming publicly known, we have no choice but to terminate your employment effective immediately. Your final paycheck will be mailed to your registered address. Please ensure you return all company property by the end of the week. Asterisk. Sincerely, HR Department." Her world tilted. Her breath caught in her throat as her vision blurred. The email was from her work, confirming what she had feared. The company had found out. They had learned about her personal issues, the scandal surrounding her name, and now they were letting her go. Rachel sat back in her chair, staring at the screen, feeling the weight of her downfall pressing against her chest. She had been so consumed by the destruction of her marriage, by Mark's manipulations, that she hadn't even considered how everything she did affected her professional life. She had lost her career. She had lost her reputation. And now she was losing herself. Her phone buzzed again, and this time it was a message from Erica. "I just heard about your job. I'm so sorry, Rach. I never thought it would go this far. Please know that I'm here if you need me. I don't know how to make things right, but I'm here." Rachel read the message, her emotions a whirlwind of confusion, anger, and pain. Erica had been part of the destruction, but now she was offering apologies. Rachel didn't know if she could trust anyone anymore. The weight of the betrayal, of everything that had been taken from her, was too much. She slammed her phone down on the desk, the sound echoing in the otherwise silent room. She stood up, pacing back and forth, trying to make sense of everything. She couldn't breathe. She couldn't think. All she could feel was the suffocating pressure of her life collapsing in on itself. And then, as if on cue, her phone buzzed once more. This time it was a message from Mark. "I hope you've had time to think. Everything is in motion now. You've made your choice. And now I'm making mine." The words sent a chill down Rachel's spine. He had been waiting. Waiting for her to feel the full impact of what she had done. She couldn't escape him. No matter how much she wanted to, no matter how much she tried to rebuild, he would always be there, lurking in the shadows, controlling her every move. Rachel sank into her chair, the weight of everything settling over her like a heavy blanket. She had no answers. She had no plan. She was lost, adrift in a sea of mistakes and consequences. But there was one thing she could do. She could fight back. Somehow she had to find the strength to take control of her own fate, to reclaim the parts of her life that Mark couldn't destroy. She wasn't going to let him take everything from her, even if it meant fighting fire with fire. The game wasn't over. Not yet. And Rachel wasn't going to surrender without a fight. Later that evening, Rachel found herself standing in front of the mirror in her bedroom, staring at her reflection. The woman staring back at her was unfamiliar. She had been so focused on the world outside, on Mark's control, on Erica's betrayal, that she hadn't stopped to think about who she was anymore. The woman in the mirror was broken, yes, but she was still standing. She had been pushed to the edge, but she hadn't fallen. Not yet. Rachel knew she couldn't undo her mistakes. She couldn't fix everything that had gone wrong. But she could stop letting them define her. She could stop letting Mark have control over every aspect of her life. She wasn't the woman she used to be, but maybe that was a good thing. Maybe it was time for her to rebuild from the ashes, to find a new version of herself. A stronger version. One who didn't rely on anyone else to define her worth. The journey ahead wouldn't be easy. There would be more pain, more loss, and more difficult decisions. But Rachel was ready. She wasn't going to let her life slip away into the hands of someone else anymore. She was going to fight for herself. Tomorrow she would start fresh. Tomorrow she would take back control. And no matter what Mark did, no matter what happened, she would be the one to decide her future. Rachel turned away from the mirror, her heart steady for the first time in days. The storm had come, but she was still standing. And she wasn't going to let it break her. Not now. Not ever. The following morning, Rachel woke with a sense of purpose that had eluded her for so long. For the first time in weeks, the heavy fog of confusion and despair seemed to lift, if only slightly. She had been drowning in Mark's manipulation, in her own regrets, but today felt different. Today she would take control, even if it was just one small step at a time. After a restless night, the first thing Rachel did was pull herself together. She needed a plan, and more importantly, she needed to move forward. She couldn't keep hiding in the shadows of her mistakes. She had lost her job, but she was still alive. She still had her mind, her strength, she still had something to fight for. Rachel's phone buzzed again, breaking her thoughts. She hesitated before glancing at the screen, already knowing it was from Mark. She had already been dreading it, but when she saw the message, her stomach twisted in a way she hadn't expected. Asterisk, I've set the wheels in motion, Rachel. You will lose everything if you don't do what I say. Asterisk. Her heart sank, but her resolve remained firm. He was trying to intimidate her, to push her into a corner, but she wasn't going to cower. Not anymore. With a deep breath, Rachel put her phone down and stood up. She needed a distraction, a way to clear her head and prepare herself for the next phase of her life. She grabbed her coat and left the apartment, not knowing exactly where she was going, but knowing she needed to get out of the house. She couldn't be trapped in that place any longer, surrounded by the remnants of her failed marriage and the looming shadow of Mark. As she walked through the streets of the city, Rachel allowed herself to think. She had come to terms with the fact that Mark's hold on her life had been tight. He had manipulated everything from her personal relationships to her professional downfall. But no matter how much he had planned, Rachel realized that she had the power to rewrite her story. She had lost everything, but that didn't mean she was powerless. She had to find a way to expose Mark for what he was. She couldn't let him continue to control her, to control the narrative of her life. He had made his move, but now it was her turn. Rachel's first stop was the local cafe. It was a place she had frequented for years, a small, cozy spot she used to visit when she wanted to escape the pressures of her life. She ordered her usual coffee and sat at the back, her mind working through the steps she needed to take. She needed to find evidence. She needed to prove Mark's manipulation, to show everyone what he had done. But that wasn't going to be easy. Mark was smart, calculated. He had been careful with every move, but she knew there had to be something she could use to fight back. As Rachel sipped her coffee, she pulled out her phone and began to research everything she could about Mark. She searched for public records, connections, anything that might help her piece together his plans. It didn't take long for her to realize that Mark's control extended far beyond their marriage. He had connections in high places, and he had been playing the long game with his carefully crafted web of lies. It was clear now that she wasn't just dealing with a man who wanted revenge. Mark was building something much bigger. He was manipulating entire networks, using his resources to get what he wanted. And Rachel was just one small part of his plan. But that also meant she wasn't alone. There were others. There had to be. Rachel knew she had to be careful. Mark would be watching her every move, and she couldn't afford to make any mistakes. But she also knew that it was time to stop running, to stop hiding. She wasn't going to let him destroy her. As the afternoon passed, Rachel felt a small spark of hope growing inside her. She may not have all the answers yet, but she was getting closer. She had a plan now. And with that she would fight. The next few days were a blur of activity. Rachel worked tirelessly to gather information, reaching out to people who might know more about Mark and his connections. She couldn't afford to waste time, not when she knew that Mark was only a step away from executing his final blow. One night, as she sat at her kitchen table, sorting through the information she had gathered, her phone buzzed again. She almost didn't want to check it, knowing it was probably Mark. But this time when she saw the message, her heart raced. It was from Erica. Rachel, I know you're angry with me. I get it. But I've been thinking a lot about everything that's happened. Mark's not the person you think he is. He's worse. I don't know if I can help you, but I'll try. Please be careful. Rachel stared at the message, a mix of emotions flooding her. Erica had finally realized the truth, and part of Rachel wanted to believe that her friend could still be an ally. But the other part of her was cautious. Too many people had betrayed her already. Could she trust Erica again? She put the phone down and took a deep breath. Trust was a luxury she couldn't afford right now. But Erica's message did something to her. It reminded her that she wasn't alone in this fight. She didn't know what kind of help Erica could offer, but she would take whatever she could get. Rachel stood up, her determination settling over her like armor. It was time to take the next step. She had a plan and it was time to execute it. Mark thought he had her cornered, but he had underestimated her. She was stronger than he realized. She wasn't going to let him win. Not this time. The following morning, Rachel woke up with a renewed sense of purpose. She had made a decision. She was going to confront Mark. No more hiding. No more playing by his rules. She didn't know what the outcome would be, but she was ready to face whatever came next. Rachel had learned something important over the past few days. Even when everything is falling apart, there's always a way forward. She wasn't going to let Mark's game control her any longer. It was time for her to make her move. As she walked to the front door, Rachel paused for a moment, taking a deep breath. She had no idea what she was about to walk into, but she was ready. The reckoning had come, and she was going to meet it head-on. With one last glance around the apartment, she stepped out into the unknown, her heart pounding in her chest. The game was on, and this time Rachel was in control.
The city street seemed to pulse with energy as Rachel walked toward Mark's office. She had planned this moment for days, weighing every possibility, every outcome. She had no idea what she would find once she confronted him, but the truth was clear. She had no choice but to face him. The game was no longer one of waiting, it was one of action. Rachel had been caught in the web of his manipulation long enough. She had let him control the narrative, dictate her emotions, her actions, but not anymore. The evidence she had uncovered was damning. His connections, the hidden network of influence he had built over the years, all lied bare. Mark had been playing a game, and now it was her turn to play. She had reached a point of no return, and it felt liberating. Her steps quickened as she neared the building. Mark's office was a symbol of his power, sleek, polished, cold. He had always surrounded himself with luxury, with things that spoke of status and control. But Rachel wasn't intimidated by his empire anymore. She had seen the tricks, the lies, and the careful manipulation beneath the surface. Now, she was ready to dismantle it all. Rachel entered the building, her heels clicking against the marble floors, her heart beating in time with each step. The receptionist greeted her with a polite smile, asking if she had an appointment. Rachel debuted her with pleasantries. "I'm here to see Mark Fisher," she said firmly. "Now." The receptionist hesitated, but, recognizing her from the countless times she had visited the office with Mark, relented. "He is expecting you," she said, motioning toward the elevator. Rachel's pulse raced as she stepped inside. The elevator hummed softly as it ascended to the top floor, where Marquez's office was located. She stared at her reflection in the mirrored walls, her face a mixture of determination and exhaustion. The woman looking back at her wasn't the same one who had walked out of this building just days ago. That woman was scared, unsure, lost. The woman now was Someone who had found her strength, who had found her voice. When the elevator doors opened, Rachel walked down the corridor, past the closed doors of other high-powered executives, until she reached Marquez's office. The door was slightly ajar, and she could see him inside, sitting behind his desk, his back to her. She knocked, but there was no response. So, she opened the door. "Mark," she said, her face steady. He turned, his face unreadable. "Rachel," he greeted, his tone neutral, almost casual. "What brings you here today?" Rachel didn't waste time with pleasantries. "You've been playing a game for a long time, Mark," she said, her voice cutting through the silence like a knife. "And it's time for it to end." Mark didn't flinch. Instead, he leaned back in his chair, studying her with a slick smile. "Easy. You've finally figured it out, and I've known for a while," Rachel shot back. "I just didn't want to admit it." Marquez's smile faltered for just a moment, and Rachel Shallallahu Alaihi Wasallam the flicker of something in his eyes. It was brief, but it was there, a hint of uncertainty. "What are you planning to do, Rachel?" he asked, leaning forward slightly. "You don't think you can just walk in here and destroy everything you've built, do you?" Rachel stood taller, the weight of his voice rolling off her like water off a duck's back. "I'm not here to destroy anything, Mark. I'm here to expose it. Everything you've done, everything you've manipulated, people are going to see it for what it really is." Marquez gaze hardened, but Rachel wasn't intimidated. "You are not as untouchable as you think you are. I've gathered evidence, Mark. I've spoken to people. You can hide behind your money, your power, your lies anymore." Marquez's expression shifted, just a fraction, but Rachel Shallallahu Alaihi Wasallam it, the hint of panic. He wasn't invincible, after all. For all his power, for all his planning, he had never accounted for Rachel standing up to him. "You think I do believe you?" he asked, his voice cold now. "You are a woman with nothing to your name anymore, Rachel. No job, no reputation. You are just as disposable as the rest." Rachel stepped forward, her resolve growing with every word. "I have more than you think. I have the truth. And that's all in it." For a moment, Mark said nothing. The tension in the room was thick, the unspoken battle playing out in the space between them. Rachel could feel the weight of her own decisions hanging in the air. She had fought for this moment, for this truth, and now it was time to make sure Mark wouldn't destroy her, or anyone else, ever again. Finally, Mark stood up, his expression darkening. "You don't know what you're messing with, Rachel. I've built everything from the ground up. You think you can just take it all down with a few words? You think people will care about what you have to say?" "I don't need everyone to believe me," Rachel replied, her voice steady. "I just need the people who matter to know the truth. And you can stop them from hearing it. Not anymore." Marquez's eyes narrowed, but Rachel wasn't finished. She reached into her bag, pulling out the stack of evidence she had collected, The photos, the documents, everything that exposed his lies. She placed it all on his desk, the sound of the papers hitting the surface echoing in the otherwise silent room. I'm done running, Mark, she said, her voice quiet but resolute. I'm not afraid of you anymore. For the first time, Mark seemed to falter. He glanced at the papers on his desk, then back at Rachel, and in that moment, she knew she had won. She had taken back control. She had taken her life back. You're making a mistake, Mark said, his voice now latched with frustration. No, Rachel said firmly. The mistake was thinking you could control me. The mistake was thinking they just let you walk all over me. It's over now. She turned and walked toward the door, the weight of everything she had just done settling in. But as she reached for the handle, she paused, glancing back at him one last time. You may have built this empire, Mark, but it's built on lies. And eventually, every empire falls. Remember that. With those final words, Rachel walked out of the room, leaving Mark in the dust of his own making. The game was over. And Rachel was finally free.